Welcome to the Invested Teacher Podcast with Kyle Pierce, Matt Bigley, and John Orr.
Get ready to be taught as we share our successes and failures encountered during our real-life lessons, learning how to build generational wealth from the ground up.
Welcome, invested students, to another episode of the Invested Teacher Podcast. And once again, we are missing Matt. Matt is a busy beaver out there running around and closing deals. So good for Matt. Definitely a positive, of course. Positive for, we'll say, him and the people he's working with. Maybe negative for us because we don't get to see him. But We're going to do our best to try to help the invested students here on today's episode to dig into something that kind of hits close to home for you and I there, John.
For sure it does. And I think this is going to be kind of an eye-opening episode. Maybe it's going to open some options for you when you think, this deal went sour. Or you didn't think about a particular option. This is the scenario for us. We got into a flip deal last year, and when we got into that deal, we talked about it on a previous episode as well. But when we got into that deal, we had kind of our kind of different scenarios. We had scenario A, which is what we want to see happen, and then we also have like the scenario B, which is like if scenario A can't happen, then we want to see scenario B. And unfortunately, in this particular deal, scenario B is the path that this one went down, and we took possession of this flip, and then continued to flip it ourselves. We weren't flipping it ourselves. That's kind of where the B scenario happened. So we took possession of. I guess we had possession of this house all along, and that was part of the deal. So that episode that we chatted about that. We can you can go and learn about that scenario. But we've got this house, and then we continue the actual flipping ourselves. Found someone to kind of keep that flipping alive. But we're in a situation where, like, do we sell? Do we rent out? The original plan A was to sell this property for a profit and move on. But our plan B was to rent it out. It was to take it over and get it all rent ready, and then rent out long term. And that's where we were. But we've actually been pursuing another option, which is where we want to give you this option, because this can be like this kind of backup plan that if this plan A and plan B don't necessarily go the way you want, you could have a plan C, and knowing the details of plan C can kind of be rewarding for you. It could be kind of it can kind of lift the weight off your shoulders, knowing that you have another avenue to pursue when you need to. And that's what we're talking about here. And that avenue for us, we're exploring. We haven't actually decided, right, Kyle? Like, we don't know if this is exactly where we're going to go, but we're going to go down this avenue for a little bit and see if it's rewarding it. Yeah. And that is to take this property and do a rent to own on it.
Yes. Yeah. And I want to back it up too, and just sort of preface as well, like that this deal was actually supposed to be a private money deal. We get a lot of people reaching out to us talking about how private money and the high rates of return, especially if you go direct to the lender, or direct to the borrower, high rates of return, right? So that seems really exciting. And, for us, we saw the deal. We saw the property. And the one thing that, we've discussed before is that you, myself, and Matt, we're not necessarily like the most, physically able to fix properties, right? And
we might. We just don't want to. We just want to.
Yeah, we don't want to, and I don't want to learn about that right now. Anyway, my dad is very, very disappointed if he's listening right now. But so we went into this thing, and the price of the property at the time made sense, but the big piece that was unknown for us was sort of like, how much money is it going to take in order to put this thing into a position that it's going to then be able to fetch a high enough return? So it's like right out the door, it's like, if it was 10 grand of work, then it's like, wow, this is going to be great. If it's going to be 80 grand of work, then this may not be so great. So that got us a little concerned. And that is why we put this property into our name. So once again, thinking ahead, if you're doing, private money, if you're exploring those options, just make sure that you know what you're getting into, because in this particular case, I don't want to know what may have happened if, let's say, we just sort of let this thing go as a private money deal. I'm guessing that we would have some pretty high legal costs, and who knows if anything would have came from it. So properties in our name, our sort of backup plan was, hey, we're going to have a single family home that we're going to put a little bit of money into, and we will rent this property. And at the end of the day, no harm done. We love real estate. The one thing that we're not huge fans of is necessarily having a ton of single family properties, because as folks who are listening to the podcast know, we have sort of shifted to multifamily and more units than less. So, where our sweet spot is, like, fourplex is still kind of tough, because the numbers still are difficult to cash flow. So we tend to look at, more than 4 units, but kind of maxing out, in the low teens. That seems to be our sweet spot right now. And as we were coming up, down the stretch, Jay is an amazing contractor, good friend, and an amazing contractor who has taken over this project. 8 months of almost like nothing happening. Then we got rid of, that particular contractor who was supposed to be the borrower, got rid of them, changed the locks, and moved on to the next one. And Jay's been in there just slugging it, doing an amazing job. We're what, like 6 weeks in, maybe something like that. We got a couple more weeks to go. He had to actually undo some of the work. It was a real mess. However, we're now coming up and we're going, okay, like, let's get ready. We're looking at comps and we're going, we could put it on the or on the market and maybe break even. We could do that, but then there's costs associated with that, realtor fees and so on. And we thought, maybe we'll do the renting like we had said. And that kind of got me thinking about, wait a second, Matt and I had tried the idea of a rent to own program. This was many years ago. And, we had interviewed some people. Really, what I realized in the process is we went about it all wrong. And we sort of went, you know what, this isn't for us. It just was very time consuming. We didn't have systems in place is really what it came down to. So we experimented with it and we thought, we're going to put this in the too hard pile, not in the garbage, because, we can always come back to it. And that's what got me thinking. And I pitched to you, I said, why don't we at least spend some time re-exploring the idea of a rent to own, because this property actually might be a perfect fit for a family or a person or a couple who has had a hard time getting a traditional mortgage, but they really want home ownership. So we thought, what? Let's give this a new whirl, given the fact that we now have much better systems in place. We know a lot more about how systems work, and we have the tools at our fingertips to try to make this process as slick and smooth as possible.
All right. So when you say we have systems in place, let's give a window into the changes we made. So Kyle, I want you to think about your old self before you put, that option from a while ago into the too hard pile. You were trying to make a rent to own option work. And then I want you to think about, what was an initial step that you did back then? And then what change did you make to make it seem more manageable now?
Yeah, like back then, this would be probably in 2017, maybe 2018. I started thinking about this and going, this was back when I, had my mortgage license still. Again, regretful that I let that thing expire, because, I think it's a really great asset to have. But knowing all of those details, I was thinking, we might have some opportunities here where we could go in, find some properties, potentially do some fixing to the properties, and then also on the back end, be able to help individuals who are struggling to get in. So rather than just renting it, you're actually offering an opportunity to them. And of course, there's a benefit associated with it to us, right? So that we'll talk about some of those things that come in as well. But one of the reasons for me that I think really got us thinking maybe this isn't a great idea was we didn't have a system of filtering whether people were a good fit or not. So if you can imagine this, right, you throw it out there to the world and say, hey, are you a renter And people are, renters are
Mm-hmm.
going, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to own a home? And the answer is yes, of course I do, and it
Mm-hmm.
seems like
Mm-hmm.
everybody wants to own a home rather than renting. So it was really, that was the process. We had a form. So it was an online form, but the problem was we didn't ask the right questions. We didn't go deep enough in the questioning to really get a sense of, do they have the right pieces that make it a good fit? Now, for those people who are thinking, to themselves, they're going, well, wait a second, like, what is a good fit? What isn't a good fit? Like, surprisingly to many is like, actually, credit has very little to do with it. So like poor credit or no credit or a past bankruptcy, actually, these are the types of people that can actually be, it can be a good fit for them. And your goal is to help ensure that if they enter into a rent to own agreement, that they're putting some skin in the game up front, right? Which is really important. And that you're helping to ensure that they can get to that place, which is home ownership, whether it's 2 years from now. 3 years is like kind of like the sweet spot, but sometimes people will go up to 5 years or even further in order to try to help guide people towards home ownership. So it's like they get to lock in this home now, like picture it like a lease, but then they have the option to buy at the end of the term. And my biggest downfall was I would I would go to Tim Hortons to meet with anyone interested and explain the process. That's the teacher in me, right? Like any students like, hey, can you help explain this? I was like, sure, I'd love to. But when you really think about how many times I went to meet with people for coffee, and at the end of the conversation, an hour later, highly caffeinated after drinking a coffee, and then going to the next meeting and drinking another coffee, we find out that actually, like, these people, it's actually not a good fit for them.
Right.
And here's
So,
why.
yeah.
So we wanted to make sure that now we've got a better process so that we're not wasting their time, and we're obviously not wasting our time in the process.
So what key questions did you put in your form to immediately rule out those people that were like, look, this is not a good fit. We don't even have to even contact them. Or it's a quick email to say, like, thanks for your interest. Like obviously as some folks who are, interested in, lending money, borrowing money, getting into investment deals, obviously looking at potential income, possible, their debts, looking at a credit report like that. Those are like getting all of those documents in order. Like you're not doing that on the form. Like that's probably step 2 or 3 down the line. If they're a right fit, let's go and actually look at confirming, like trust these people, but verify the data. Like that part happens. So are you just asking income? Are you asking debt? Like, are you asking like what or how much they're putting down? And it's like, hey, these are the key questions. Give us a couple key questions so that if someone's listening, that they're also thinking about this, so they can build their own form.
Yeah, I'm going to give you some key, really pieces of information that you want. And I'm going to recommend that if you're curious about it, and let's say you're thinking like, hey, what questions specifically should I ask? More questions is better. And the reason why more is better, now, in some marketing and sales strategy, you would think, like anyone who knows marketing and sales strategy, especially online, less is more to get a lead. But in this case, it's actually like what you want is you want to lose people who aren't really committed, right? So I would much rather them not make it to the end of the form, because like, this is too much work. And it's like, if you think this is too much work, you're probably not a good fit.
Totally.
And then they're off to the races. So more questions is better. If you want to know the exact questions, you should head over to northshoreproperties.co/rent to own. And that will get you there. Just get to that North Shore Properties website and you can check out our rent to own section. And that will actually explain a lot of the pieces of the process as well. But there's a button there and you can go ahead and like click on it and check out the form. If you do submit the form at the end, let us know that you're just like curious and you're from the podcast versus, me actually analyzing your application. However, I would say what I really want to know is some key details. The key details that I want to know is right away, like, what is your income? Okay. And like your income is going to tell me a lot about whether they're a good fit for a specific property. Right now, it also will tell you which properties, if you're willing to go and buy a property with this person, right, which is a big commitment, right? There's a lot of work to be done there. But with us, we know the property, we know the price point, we know those pieces, I can very quickly look at their annual household income and I could get a sense right away whether it's going to be a good fit or not, simply because I can estimate, what is that net income going to be? Like, what's that monthly
Sure.
money coming through? How many people live in the household is another question. And then right away, I'm super curious to know how much of a down payment or savings for a down payment do they already have? And the questions, we usually make it a multiple choice, just ranges is good enough. It's like, I don't have one, right? That's like a big flag. It's like, if you don't have like anything, because then the next range is like between, I think it's like $500 and 5,000 or something along those lines, between 5,000 and 10 and 15, 15 and 20, and then above 20. And when you see all these coming in, so first of all, income comes in, super low income for this particular property. I know right away, I do respond to them and I say, hey, listen, doesn't mean that you're not a good fit for rent to own in general, but for this particular property, here's what we're after. And I've got a copy and paste email I can send back to them, right?
Yeah.
For people who do have a decent income, then what we can do is then look at the next step. And for me is that down payment piece, because I'm going, if you haven't saved up anything, then you basically decided today that you want to own a home. And that's not really the person we're looking for. Like, we're looking for like someone who's been working towards it, because if you haven't been working towards even saving up a bit of a down payment, like you don't have any savings available to you, my guess is going to be that you actually are not going to have the budget or the cash flow to be able to try to do something like this, which will require some sort of down payment commitment.
Yeah. Those are all great questions to kind of help kind of filtering and find the right folks. Now, here's a wonder I think folks might have as well, and this is definitely part of your qualification on your end, because if you think about looking at their potential, monthly income and then comparing that to what we would perceive as the payment they would need to make to cover the house expenses, to cover the mortgage, to cover all of these things. This is what an underwriter is going to be looking at when they're deciding, are you the right fit to borrow money from a particular lender, and thinking about some of the ratios that have to go into that, being the total debt service ratio, the gross debt service ratio. Like, these are all important numbers to look at when qualifying potential borrowers with lenders. But Kyle, in order to do that, you knew what the say the mortgage value was going to be, like on your end. Did you share that information up front with these potential renters, like, so they know what they're getting into? Like, did they know? Like, I don't think you shared the details of the actual house, like the location, all of that, but you did you give them a sense of like, this is what the value of the house is, and so they can actually self-filter by going like, that's too much for me, I don't even know. So give me a snapshot into that. And also I kind of want to get into your like your reasoning or the numbers side of things on how did you come up with the right number, thinking like you're going to rent to own this eventually. So like, are we pricing the mortgage and the purchase price on today's value or the future value, down the road?
These are all great questions, John. And, one thing I do want to also mention, because I feel like we sort of glossed over it, is like, what is typically, like any rent to own program, you get to decide it, what it is,
right,
what you want. Like, you're the person who's running the program, so you get to decide. So how I've seen them in the past and how I see most people doing them is really, what you want to do is you want to have some sort of, we'll call it like a rent amount, which would be like a mortgage payment, so to speak. And then on top of that, the difference between a rent to own and renting is that typically rent will include property taxes, property insurance, and like any repairs or any issues that come up in the home, like the furnace stops working, they call the landlord, right? In a rent to own, it's like you are the owner, even though your name is not on title yet. So it's almost like you're trying to like slowly pass that baton on. Like you pass the responsibility baton on to them. So there's some benefits. Some people love rent to own and hate being the landlord because, again, now it's like you're not actually the landlord. You are collecting the whatever that rent amount is, right? For them to live there, which you could call it like a mortgage payment, right? You're collecting, and you don't have to do this. You could say, hey, you guys pay the property taxes, right? Just like the utilities are in their name,
Right.
they
Right.
pay it directly. Well, the way I like to do it is I go, no,
Yeah.
no, you pay
You should.
me the
Yeah.
property taxes and you pay me the property insurance because I want to make sure that those things are being paid and that I'll know right
Well,
away if they're not.
that is actually a key move because if the taxes aren't paid, then the municipality has the right to take that property, right? So we want to secure our asset by making sure that those things get paid. This is why, say, lenders, if you have a mortgage on your property, why lenders will encourage you to have the taxes paid through them because then they can secure the property to make sure that their asset is getting covered.
Exactly. And you still probably want to have, I say probably, we will, and I would encourage you to as well, anyone listening, you would want to have the same stipulations for a rental where, you can walk through, give the 24 hours notice. Hey, I want to walk through, make sure batteries on the fire alarms are taken care of, that, the house in general isn't in disrepair, right? Like if you show up and a window's completely broken, they're violating the sort of contract that says you will keep this home up to, you will keep it airtight and you will make sure that it's being maintenance or the maintenance is being upheld or upkept on the property. So all those details are there. But the one other detail that's really important, which makes this harder for people who have typically been renting, is that you're now, in many cases, you're having to try to encourage a down payment savings because, as you may or may not know, I know you know this, John, having your mortgage license, that 5% down is sort of the minimum down payment amount that a lender will consider. So if someone's coming in and they have 5,000 to put towards to a property, but that is not 5%, then what we're doing is we're structuring and saying, hey, listen, you want this term to be a 3-year term? Well, over these 36 months, on top of those other amounts that we're going to collect, we're actually going to collect your monthly down payment credit. So this is money that is going to get applied at the end of the contract as the down payment. So this removes their responsibility from having to put it in a side account because what we don't actually want them to walk away. Now, if they do walk away, you are going to hang on to those down payment credits. That is not the end goal. It shouldn't be your end goal if you want to do a rent to own. We really want to do this so we're helping someone get into the market. But at the same time, we're not doing it in like donating our funds to these people for that duration of time, right? So you have to still look at it as an investment. How are you going to win and how are they going to win in the end? And that's how we've been structuring it. So there's a lot of moving parts here. We're giving them the responsibility of this home, but we're sort of taking some of that financial responsibility off of them. It's like, hey, can you make this amount each month for 36, 48, 60 months, whatever the term is that you've come to agree to? And is this going to work for them? So that's where these questions in this form become really important. And you can get more targeted when you know the specifics of the property. If you're just shopping for any old property, then it's like the details become a little bit harder to kind of analyze. But for us, we're going, well, we know the purchase price is going to be this, which means with 5% down in X number of years, that means their mortgage payment's going to be blank, assuming interest rates are similar to what they are today. Can they afford this? Can they afford the rent payments now, the rent to own payments now? If the answer is no, or it's too close, or it's tight, or it's, just not, it's unethical, in my opinion, you just don't want to go there. And you just want to let them know and say, here's why. And then here's a link to our website that will help explain the process even further so that you can get on the right track. And if you come back to us, what we always say is we are willing to work with you, but you need to show us some sort of improvement.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, we're not going to commit the time now just because you want to learn more about it. Do the learning, come back to us, and then we will, continue engaging in this conversation.
Yeah, I like that, that we're educating, this potential family that's coming into the home on how to restructure their finances so that they can build their generational wealth too, and they just might need that extra hand. Now, Kyle, why don't we give a little bit of insight into why an investor would pursue this option? Because remember, our path A was to flip for a profit and get out.
Yep.
Our path B was if it went sour and we needed to, we couldn't flip because obviously maybe the price was too high in the market. This is where we got to, where it's like, okay, well, the money we've sunk into this at this point, markets fell a little bit. It doesn't make sense to sell. We'd be selling at a loss. We thought, hey, why don't we rent this to a possible renter? But what was the tipping point in your mind that pushed us to this third option? And why does the third option work for us versus the other, part B option?
Yeah, it's a great question here. And, I think what I've recognized now, which I don't think I recognized earlier in the process, the first time we explored this, Matt and I, is the idea that you're kind of in a rent to own, you're sort of front loading the work in sort of filtering and finding. And of course, you have to do the same thing when you're looking for a tenant, but it's like a harder find, like you're finding that ideal person. It's going to be a harder find, but after the fact, you have, I would argue, like a more predictable sort of, view forward. Whereas with rent, if I'm renting to someone, there is some unpredictability there, because now it's like if the furnace does go, that's like an unexpected expense on me, the investor, right? If the roof needs to be repaired, if the tenants, stop paying rent, and then you have to do the landlord tenant board and like all of those details. There's a lot of like management pieces that sort of make that like more work ongoing. Whereas once you sign a rent to own agreement with an ideal candidate, with an ideal client who is the right fit, who's committed to doing this, who has the right numbers financially, where this is a legitimate good move for them in the long run, then what you're doing is you're putting yourself in a position where you're going, okay, so I'm limiting my sort of cost here moving forward, because now the costs are all associated to them. You have a little bit of protection in that down payment, whatever that initial down payment amount is. Some people are like, I won't even enter into this for under a $15,000 down payment, right? And maybe that's, someone listening. Maybe for somebody else, like you need 25 down, and, because you're living in a really expensive market, and they're going to work towards 50,000 down, whatever it might be. You get to decide what is that thing. And that's sort of like your safety net. If the person does, violate the terms, they walk away, they other things have happened in life, just like what might happen if a mortgage isn't paid anymore. They're going to walk away from that property, and you have at least that down payment to sort of, move on to the next, and then, again, go through the process again. So I'd say the big piece here is, two things. If you're doing a rent to own, you're kind of front loading a lot of the work and the effort. The other thing is you are sort of getting a more predictable sort of outlook in terms of the financials, because you're going to decide on a purchase price ahead of time. For us, we try to put a fair appreciation amount. Some people might use the average over the last 10 years, which was 6.8%. For us, we go with the same thing we use for our deals, which is typically 3%. So we're not like trying to like make a ton of money on the appreciation of the property. We're trying to be fair, so that someone can sort of feel like they bought the property now. We know what that agreement is at the end. It's all documented legally. And I guess the last piece, there's an opportunity if you find a property that does need work and attention, you might be able to, if you have a system, like if you friends listening have someone like Jay, like we now have, you might be able to add 25,000 in renovations and be able to make that property worth more, and then engage in this rent to own process. So it really depends on who you are. If you have like maybe a social goal of like helping more people attain home ownership,
Mm-hmm.
that might be part of it. You just really have to figure out like what is your niche. And for us, we're using sort of a scenario where we got lemons. We're trying to turn it into lemonade and use it as a learning experience. So we're like kind of testing ourselves to see maybe rent to own, maybe we do like it. I don't know. Like jury's still out for us. But we're at least going through the process, and we've had about 42 people complete the process or complete the application, with about 4 that are, ideal sort of
Right.
earmarked good candidates. So it's not like a massive sort of, ideal candidate rate, but ultimately at the end, we're learning a lot about this process, and, we're happy to share it with everyone listening here today.
Yeah. So rent to own, being, not our original plan here, actually took, like you said, it took these lemons. We're trying to make some lemonade out of it. We're trying to make a flip that kind of didn't go our way into a rent option, or say getting tenants in there that wasn't going to cash flow for us, but now kind of moving into a rent to own kind of brings us up to at least cash flow neutral for a temporary time, moving into, say, offloading that to a potential renter, or sorry, a potential owner, in there's rent to own options. So if you want to kind of see that process and get your hands on some of the system that we work through, you can head on over to northshoreproperties.co/rent-to-own. North Shore Properties.
You know what? We'll make a short link. It's
rent to own.
Rent to own,
and
you'll find it, and we'll get that going for you.
You got it. All right, folks. Thanks for joining us here again on the Invested Teacher podcast. If this was the first episode you listened to, we are always welcoming of new listeners. However you found it, this being the first time you've listened, did you find it on social media? Did you find it because someone mentioned it? Share it the exact same way. So if you found it on social media, please share it on social media. If you found it from a friend, share it with a friend. We want to spread, building generational wealth information to as many people as we can, so we can change trajectories of many of you. So, hey, make sure you share it, please.
Awesome stuff. Hey, head over to investedteacher.com. Check out all the resources. Again, show notes, links to resources, transcripts, all those good things. In particular, though, the one I'm most excited about is our what we call the best list of investment books, and you can actually download it and take it away with you, print it off, put it on your nightstand, and sort of like, maybe like, order them out. Like, I'm going to go one on this one. I'm going to do this one first, this one second. All kinds of amazing books there for you to grab. Once again, that's investedteacher.com/books. And hey, friends, until next time, class dismissed.
Just as a reminder, folks, the content here you heard today is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or other advice.